All right, the next part of evolution that we're going to discuss is speciation, or how do new species evolve? There's a lot of misconceptions about human evolution that we'll address next week that talks about a lot of people say humans come from chimps, which is not true. We share common ancestors. So the next couple of days is going to be spent talking about how species evolve, how new species arise, and then how we determine that that's the case. All right. So Darwin never actually tackled how these new species arose. Okay. Darwin quote. We're just going to keep going. All right. So first of all, what constitutes a species? Biological species concept was defined by Ernest Mayr. It's a population whose members can interbreed and produce viable, fertile offspring. So for our purposes to understand even more, is they basically have the same number of chromosomes with similar alleles. They have they're reproductively compatible, and that's what that means. So we have the same number of chromosomes, the DNA is similar enough, and it won't cause massive defects, okay? All right, so distinct species, we're looking at these two different birds here. They have songs and behaviors that are different, and that is enough to prevent interbreeding, and we're gonna talk about that as we go on more. So how do new species originate? Populations must become isolated, okay? So they can become geographically isolated, reproductively isolated, and isolated populations will evolve independently. So we have isolation, we have allopatric, okay, and that's we're dealing with geographic separation, and then or other country, and then we have sympatric, which is dealing with they still live in the same area and they're in the same country, so they somehow become isolated, and we'll talk about these places now. So pre-reproduction barriers. So that's an obstacle to mating or fertilization if mating occurs. So we have geographic isolation, we have ecological isolation, temporal isolation. We're going to go through and talk about all these. This is behavioral isolation, mechanical isolation, and gametic isolation. So geographic isolation, here we go. So species occur in different areas, okay? There's actually a physical barrier to them reproducing. Allopatric speciation. Sorry. Okay. Harris's antelope squirrel inhabits the canyon's south rim. Just a few miles away on the north rim lives the closely related white-tailed antelope squirrel. So these two will not mate because of geographic isolation. So we have ecological isolation, also known as sympatric speciation. Species occur in the same region, but occupy different habitats, so they rarely encounter each other. Okay, that's called reproductive isolation. There's two species of garter snake. They occur in the same area, but one lives in water and one is terrestrial. Okay, lions and tigers could hybridize, but they live in different habitats. Lions live in the grasslands and tigers live in the forest. So temporal isolation, species that breed during different times of day, different seasons, or different years, and they cannot mix their gametes, okay? This is reproductive isolation. Sympatric speciation, all right? So an example is the eastern spotted skunk and the western spotted skunk. God, they're really ugly. They overlap in range, but eastern mates in late winter and western mates in late summer. So those are two things that keep them separated. So these are behavioral isolation. This is the unique behavioral patterns and rituals that isolate different species. It identifies members of a species. It attracts mates of the same species. This deals with courtship rituals, mating rituals. We're looking at a blue-footed booby, and these are probably the most interesting birds I've ever seen. They mate only after a courtship display unique to their own species. You should Google it. It's kind of funny to watch. This is reproductive isolation, okay? So recognizing your own species, courtship songs of sympatric species of lacewing. So they have different courtship songs. You have courtship displays, and you have more examples of firefly courtship displays. Okay, so mechanical isolation, and this one is interesting. Morphological differences can prevent successful mating. In other words, they have physical characteristics that makes it impossible for them to mate. This is dealing with reproductive isolation. So even closely related species of plants, the flowers can often have distinct appearances that attract different pollinators. The two species of monkey flower, they differ greatly in shape and color, therefore cross-pollination does not happen. This also can happen when to animals, just it's impossible. There's no mating can occur. Okay. For many insects, the male and female sex organs are closely related species do not fit together. Here's what I was talking about, preventing a sperm transfer. So we're looking at damselfly penises on the right-hand corner. Okay, so the lack of fit between the sexual organs, it makes it hard. It's hard to imagine for us, but a big issue for insects that have different shaped genitals. Okay. And gametic isolation, its sperm of one species may not be able to fertilize the egg of another species. This is a biochemical barrier, so sperm cannot penetrate the egg. The receptor recognition, lock and key between egg and sperm. Okay, chemical incompatibility. Sperm cannot survive in the female reproductive tract. Okay, so sea urchins can release sperm and egg into surrounding waters where they fuse and form zygotes. Gametes of different species, red and purple, are unable to fuse for the above reason. Okay, they are chemically incompatible. So we also have what's called post-reproductive barriers that prevent hybrid offspring from developing into viable, fertile adults. And what we're looking here at is a zebroid. So it reduces the hybrid viability, it reduces hybrid fertility, and there's a hybrid breakdown. So some organisms can reproduce and have offspring, but their offspring are infertile. This was thought to have happened between Neanderthals and modern humans. There's a lot of research out there that says that, we know that Neanderthals and humans reproduced, but there's a lot of evidence pointing to the fact that the hybrid Neanderthals were infertile, which is what ultimately led to the destruction of the Neanderthal race. Interesting, right? So reduced hybrid viability continued. The genes of different parent species may interact and impair the hybrid's development. Okay, so we have a species of salamander. They can interbreed, but the hybrids don't complete development and they are frail if they do, meaning they die easily. Even if hybrids are vigorous, they may be sterile. Okay, so chromosomes of parents may differ because of meiosis, and that makes it impossible for the hybrids to have normal gametes. Horse, okay, they have 64 chromosomes. You have, our donkey has 62. They breed, okay, and they make a mule. Mules end up having 63 chromosomes, but they're all sterile. So horses and donkeys can breed, and their offspring are mules. Mules will never have their own offspring. So if it weren't for humans, mules wouldn't continue to exist. Okay. And we're looking at, okay. So hybrids may be fertile and viable in the first generation, but when they mate, offspring are feeble or sterile, which does not help them persist in populations. Okay, so we're looking at cultivated rice. The next generation are small and sterile, and they're on a path to becoming a different species. Okay, so does speciation happen gradually or rapidly? There's gradualism and punctuated equilibrium, and let's talk about these. Charles Darwin, Charles Lyell, and Stephen, these guys are important for us to know. So gradual accumulation of small changes over a long time is what gradualism is. And then punctuated equilibrium is a theory, rapid bursts of change mixed with long periods of little or no change. Okay, gradual divergence over long spans of time is what gradualism is. It's what Charles Darwin suggested and Charles Lyell. They assume that big changes occur as the accumulation of small ones. Punctuated equilibrium is rapid bursts of change, long periods of little or no change. Species undergo rapid change when they first bud from parent to population. Okay, these guys, it's Stephen Jay Gould and Niles Eldredge who believe in punctuated equilibrium. Or they came up with the idea of punctuated equilibrium. All right, so that's our idea of speciation. We are going to talk about this at the beginning of class. I think there's a lot for us to talk about and make sure that we understand. And then we are going to work on a POGL, and then we are going to learn how to create phylogenetic trees.